Tennis is usually thought of as a pretty luxurious sport, since players are known for making millions of dollars and traveling around the world. Which one of us wouldn't like to live that lifestyle, even if just for a few weeks? It's not uncommon for tennis players to play in 4 different countries in 4 consecutive weeks. While we usually only think about how cool that is, we often forget to think about the logistics behind it. If you're traveling around all the time, that means that you need to figure out how, when, and how much it will cost for you to go to those places. While most of us rely on our cars for transportation, professional tennis players cannot afford to spend hours and hours inside a car going from one place to another. So how do tennis players normally travel? Players often choose different types of transportation depending on the level of the tournaments they compete in. Bigger tournaments usually offer local transportation, but players need to travel a little further to play those. On the other hand, smaller tournaments are often geographically closer to each other and require less traveling. In general, tennis players travel by plane, private jets, first class, or economy, train, or car. It goes without saying that Roger Federer will normally travel a little differently than a player who is ranked 1000 in the world and cannot even financially break even. Common ways to travel. Number 1. Private jet. It's natural to assume that, since tennis players make so much money, they would be flying around with their private jets all the time. However, the reality is quite different from that. Only a handful or 2 of players can afford flying in private jets, and they are usually players like Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Serena Williams. Instead of owning their own private jets, however, they most likely have fractional ownership, which means that they share the ownership of the jet with others, and can use it whenever the plane is available. By doing so, these professional players can travel with a private jet and still keep costs reasonably low for their standards. Federer has been a partner of NetJets for over a decade, which makes it even easier for him. Number 2. First class. Probably the most popular method of traveling among the top tennis players, first-class flights are a great alternative to combine comfort and cost-effectiveness. By buying first-class tickets, the players can move from one country to another without feeling exhausted after the flight. When they fly first class, they are also able to maintain a certain level of privacy, which is also highly desirable for some players. For those reasons, flying first class is the preferred way to travel for the majority of top-ranked ATP and WTA players. Number 3. Economy tickets. The majority of tennis players, however, needs to travel in economy class in order to keep costs low. These are players ranked from about 100 until 1500 in the world. Since they cannot make enough money to cover the costs of flying first class or even business, they need to stick to this more affordable way of flying. Number 4. Train. Trains can actually be a great way for players to travel, especially around Europe, if they are trying to keep costs low. Since in Europe tournaments are closer to each other than in South or North America, players are often able to travel between tournaments by train. Number 5. Tournament transportation. Lastly, during tournaments, players are usually provided transportation, paid for by the tournament's organization. In lower-level tournaments, the official method of transportation is usually shuttles that take the players from the hotel to the club and vice versa. However, when players start qualifying for ATP and Grand Slam tournaments, they are usually driven around by car. These tournaments are normally sponsored by a car maker that provides the tournament with a fleet of cars to drive the players around. How much do players spend in travels? Players at the ATP levels need to purchase tickets for longer flights, and they usually fly business or first class. Based on that, their flights will cost on average $1,000 to $1,500. On top of that, these players usually travel with a whole team, 3 or more members, and they are responsible for paying for those tickets as well. Players in the challenger levels need to travel internationally, but they usually play several consecutive tournaments on the same continent. They usually travel in economy class, with maybe a few business class tickets. Based on that, their average cost per ticket is usually $400 to $700. These players usually travel with one coach, and they are responsible for their coach's ticket. Finally, players in the ITF level can find much cheaper flights, considering they are usually for domestic flights. These players usually travel by themselves in order to reduce costs. They pay on average $100 to $300 per ticket, which highlights the difference in expenses for an ATP and ITF player.